morning, afternoon, evening, night. Dear Zontians, partners, advocates. On this significant day, Human Rights Day, we gather for the Zonta Says No Summit, an integral moment of our 16 days of activism. It's an honor to welcome you to the Zonta Says No Summit on this day, a day that reminds us of our shared responsibility to uphold integrity, dignity, equality, and freedom for all. Today, we gather not only to reaffirm our commitment to end gender-based violence, but to take decisive steps toward that goal. Just 2 weeks ago, Zonta International issued a clear and urgent call at the beginning of the Zonta Says No campaign. The time for awareness has passed and the time for action is now. Gender-based violence remains one of the most pervasive human rights violations worldwide. Nearly 1 in 3 women has endured physical or sexual violence, and every day 140 women and girls lose their lives at the hands of intimate partners or family members. And these are not just numbers, they are lives, they are dreams, and futures stolen. This crisis is unacceptable and it demands our collective action. Zonta's mission is clear: to translate awareness into tangible action. Because, as stated in our 5th November declaration, the time for action is now. Gender-based violence affects nearly 1 in 3 women globally. Silence is no longer an option. We say no and we act now. Welcome to our first session of the summit, where we delve into transformative power of lived experience. Today, Victor Rivas, a renowned actor and survivor, joins us as the National Spokesperson for the National Network to End Domestic Violence. And through his courageous storytelling, Victor challenges the notion that domestic violence is only a women's issue. Instead, he demonstrates how we all have a role in supporting survivors and disrupting the cycle of violence. Let his voice inspire us to speak out and to act. And as we move through these sessions, let us remember, awareness alone will not end violence. Action will. Zonta International calls on every individual, every organization, and every government to join us now. Speak out, act, advocate. Together, we can create a world where every woman and girl lives free from violence, exploitation, and fear. The time for action is now. I thank Zonta Says No Working Group and Zonta headquarters to make this summit happen. And I'm with you with this meaningful Human Rights Day summit. Thank you for spending it with us on this event. It means a lot. I will now pass the virtual mic to the masters of the ceremonies.
Thank you, Sala. A warm welcome to all of you to the 2025 Zonta Says No to Violence Against Women Summit. I am Kristina Rylander Bergqvist, chair of the Zonta Says No Working Group. And together with my colleagues, Tanya, Shanaz, and Lisa, I'm happy to note that we today have participants from all over the world, both Zontians, partners, and guests. As Sala said, today is Human Rights Day and the end of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. But it's only the global campaign that is ending. Violence against women and girls continues every day, all year round. The mission of our group is to support our clubs in their work with Zonta Says No and to follow up on Zonta's efforts around the world. And through our annual summit, we want to spread awareness about gender-based violence. We want to encourage everyone to speak up, and we want clubs to engage men as partners in the effort to end violence against women and girls. We all know that violence against women is not culture, it is criminal, and it's a violation of human rights. We all also know that violence against women is not a women's issue to be solved by women. Today's 3 sessions focus on men and how they, in various ways, with knowledge, will, and courage, contribute to ending men's violence against women and girls. We are honored to hear from Victor Rivas in just a moment, and we look forward to the special screening of Men Against the Tide, and later today to the discussion with 4 panelists. You have the opportunity to participate in all sessions and also the opportunity to listen to the recordings afterwards. So please note that this session is being recorded. You are welcome to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen for any questions for our speaker, Victor, which will be addressed at the end of his presentation. We will not take questions from the chat box, but please feel free to share information and comment in the chat. And to kick off today's summit, we will first focus on the topic of domestic violence. So I would now like to invite one of our Zonta Says No working group members, Tanja Takverker, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Christina. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Victor Rivas, actor, athlete, activist, and author. He has been a national spokesperson for the National Network to End Domestic Violence since 1999. Victor has also served as a community champion for the Verizon Foundation, their first champion to focus on the issue of domestic violence. Women's E! News named Victor as one of the 21 leaders for the 21st century. At that time, he was the 2nd man ever so named by the organization, and he was honored by Men Stopping Violence for his leadership as a man in the movement to end violence against women and children. A veteran film star of more than 24 movies, Victor may be best known for such roles as Antonio Banderas' ill-fated brother in The Mask of Zorro, the prison warlord Magic Mike in the cult favorite Blood In, Blood Out, and as Eddie Murphy's sidekick in The Distinguished Gentleman. His TV credits include CSI Miami, Law and Order, and NBC series Life, Modern Family, Better Call Saul, and will be a recurring guest star on HBO Max, The Pit. Please join me in welcoming Victor. We are so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Buenos días, buenas tardes, y buenas noches para mis amigos latinos. I'm really honored to take part in this virtual summit on saying no to violence against women. I'm really inspired by your passion and dedication and for the life-changing and life-saving work that all of you have been doing for decades, and for the opportunity to address men's violence against women. Most violence against women is done by men, and for the possibilities of redefining manhood for our young boys and men. I believe that you can judge a society by how they treat their women and in turn their children. Now, I know that many of you out there are also working with the young generation, the next generation, which makes me think of that African saying that I know all of us have heard by now, that it takes a village to raise a child. And if you ever thought that it's a little quaint or unrealistic or maybe overused, well, I stand before you to say that I am that child who was raised and rescued by his village. And I can honestly say that I wouldn't be standing here in front of you without the guidance and love of those in my community who, like all of you around the world, were angels and advocates in one form or another, who are a part of my team. But there's another African saying that I thought I'd also borrow to begin my remarks today, which happens to come from a Maasai tribal greeting, which is to ask the question, how are the children? Very simply, that was the measure used to gauge the health of the community. It's a question that implies that if children are well, then so too is the rest of the community. It's a question that is so important to ask for families and entire communities, and in making sure that the positive potential in every child is honored. Each year in the United States, 3 million children will be reported as victims of child abuse and neglect and witnesses of domestic violence. 1 million of these cases are serious enough for the Child Protective Services and the courts to take action. Many of these children will suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. I want to speak to you today about adverse childhood experiences, the trauma that accompanies it, and about the resilience of the human spirit, and about how all of us collectively can make a difference. So on a macro level, but I also want to emphasize how one person's guidance and intervention can change a life, save a life on a micro level. Now, before I talk more about why this means so much to me, I do need to clarify something that you may already know about me, but could use repeating. I'm not a woman. Yo no soy una mujer. Now, that may be stating the obvious, but even after 25 years of speaking out against domestic violence, I'm still often asked, yeah, but isn't that strictly a woman's issue? That seems to be a popular misconception because domestic violence needs to be everyone's issue. It really concerns me when our public debate in our country amongst our male leadership will sometimes boil down to quién es más macho, who's more manly, or that we have a leader who disparages women, especially women of color, and uses abusive language against them. You know, I believe that a manly man is a man who joins in the movement to end violence against women and children, who confronts those who commit the violence, who sets an example for our boys and young men, and who will stand up to protect and respect all women. But I also believe as men who want to do more, we should acknowledge that it is women who have pioneered the movement against violence against women, child abuse, sexual abuse. Pretty much every social justice program has been started by women. So we should just ask for a place at the table and look to follow the lead of the women that have paved the way. Now, I happen to know a little bit about misconceptions. I was born in Cuba, but I've lived in this country most of my life, and it amazes me that there are those who still want to label and pigeonhole certain sectors of society. One of the reasons that I became an actor was so I could play a wide spectrum of different characters, both good and evil. And even though I'm very proud of my Latino heritage, I wanted to portray people from different walks of life other than my own. So when I got started as an actor, I changed my last name from Rivas to Rivers. And so you're probably wondering how that's worked out. Let's see, so far I've mostly played Latino drug dealers, Latino bank robbers, Latino convicts. Oh, here's a stretch. I was Zorro's brother. Now, I played a lot of violent individuals on screen, but because in Hollywood, good usually triumphs over evil, they almost always have to kill me off very creatively. If in the movie Fled, if I was shot to death by the actor Lawrence Fishburne, if I wasn't dead enough, his partner ran over me with a motorcycle. If you saw the movie Amistad, I was skewered slowly in half with a sword. For those that saw the Mask of Zorro, you know, I had my head cut off and stuffed in a jar. And in the Hulk, let's just say I made the green guy really angry. Of course, the beauty of what we do in the movies is that it's make-believe. We have a script to follow and a director to gauge the action and even the violence, and they yell, cut, when it's over. But to the victims and survivors of domestic violence, violence against women, child abuse, it's not make-believe. Whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, it's real, it's scarring, and sometimes it's deadly. So what's a movie bad guy doing here, talking to you about why it takes a community, why it takes a team to save and protect women and their children? Why domestic violence, violence against women? Why child abuse? Why do I support the work of those attending today's summit? Why do I support education and what it inspires in all of us, especially with the most traumatized? Well, the reason that I speak is because of what happened to some people, some individuals that I know who didn't have the kind of services and awareness that your work is focusing on today. I speak because of a woman I know. This woman had come from another country with her husband and 2 young sons, like so many other immigrant families, to pursue a better way of life in America, only to find herself and her children terrorized by the oppression of domestic violence and child abuse that took place on a level of torture in their home. For 15 years after carrying the burden of cooking, cleaning, childcare, and giving birth to 3 more children, this woman also endured the physical, psychological, and spiritual wounding at the hands of her husband. Until one day, when she set on foot to the local laundromat, pulling her family's many loads of laundry behind her in a cart. Well, that woman didn't make it home that day. On the way there, she collapsed in the street, and she was rushed to a hospital where doctors said, "You're in God's hands." And that woman wouldn't give her real name. She was a Jane Doe in that hospital because she was too afraid to give her real name for fear of the punishment she would receive if she did live. And back home, their children had no idea where their mother was. And the 2 oldest sons had thought maybe the father had finally killed her and that she was never coming home. Fortunately, this woman did survive her collapse, but when she returned to the house, the domestic violence, it only increased. I also speak out because of a boy I know. This boy walked into his city's police department and he took off all his clothes in front of a room full of police officers. And as the boy stood there naked, the officers were horrified that this boy's body was covered in bruises, welts, and burns. The boy told the police, my father's doing this to me, to my siblings, and to my mom. And then he pleaded with him. He said, please go to my house and arrest him and get him out of there for good. What the police said they could do was to have the boy sign a formal complaint. They would put him in a police car, take him back to the house to talk to the father. The boy said, you don't seem to understand. If I do that and you don't arrest him, he's going to kill me when you leave. The police said there was nothing more that they could do, that it was a private family matter. Some of you have probably figured out that the woman that I'm speaking about that collapsed on the street, that was my mother. And that boy at the police station, that was me. That nightmare that began as early as I can remember was life for me, for my siblings, and for my mother. Now, to the outside world, we appeared no different than any other immigrant family trying to make it in this country. Certainly, my father appeared absolutely normal. He had a great command of English from his schooling in Cuba. He was friendly, handsome, a real charming guy. But behind closed doors lived a much different person. I don't remember my father ever hugging or kissing my mother. My mother was forbidden to hug or kiss her sons because it might turn us into sissies, according to my father. But what I do remember is him beating her, not only in rage, but with cold, methodical planning, not only with his hands and his feet, but with words and weapons too. And pregnancies, that didn't stop him. Like all of us, she lived in a constant state of terror. Now, I probably don't even know half of the brutality that my father inflicted on my mother, but I can assure you that I heard and I saw plenty. As a child, I was beaten, I was tied up, I was locked in closets, I was hammered, I was burned, just to name a few of the things that he did. But this was not about a man who had a hard time controlling his temper. You see, because my father took great care not to hit us on the face or parts of our body that were not covered up by clothing. So you're probably thinking, what were the triggers that set my father off? To be honest, I don't really know. To my knowledge, my father did not have a dependency to drugs or alcohol, and we were never really sure what my father's rules were or what might be the cause behind the physical, emotional, or spiritual abuse that he inflicted on us. Because you see, the rules could change from moment to moment. If my father told us a joke and our laughter wasn't to his liking, that could set him off. And when there are no rules, everyone copes in their own way. Some become paralyzed in fear, others go numb and they try to stay out of the way, and then others become confrontational and full of rage. I was the latter case, putting myself in the path of my father's storm, if only to distract him from beating other members of my family. And the reason I mention this to you is not because I want you to think of me as a hero, but to shed some light on the devastating impact that witnessing violence has on children. In many ways, as a child who was being battered by his father with the intensity of someone hitting another adult, well, I learned to take it. But it was much harder for me to witness the violence against my family members, my mother, my siblings, and that even included our dogs, than it was for me to receive it myself. So this leads me to feel that perpetuating violence against a domestic partner, against a woman that is witnessed by her children, is the equivalent of child abuse. Plain and simple, they're violations. Now, over the years, I've had survivors tell me that because they weren't physically beaten, that the psychological and emotional abuse that they suffered must not be as damaging as someone who was physically harmed. But what I've learned is that the body can heal quite miraculously. Mine has. On the other hand, the battering of the psyche and the soul, that just takes so much longer to repair. Of all the physically deviant ways that my father thought of to cause me pain, the one thing he did that happened that where he didn't even lift a finger to me happened one day, and he had been putting me down, calling me stupid and worthless, and a lot of other names that I won't repeat in the summit. And I finally had it with my father, and I challenged him, and I said, hey, if I'm so worthless, then what are all those trophies doing up there? And I pointed to a shelf that I'd won all these trophies in baseball. My father told me that those trophies meant nothing to him. And then to prove it, he pulled them all down. He got out a sledgehammer and he broke each and every one of those trophies in front of me. He just smashed them until they were unrecognizable. And that is what happened to my self-esteem. But here's the other question we hear all the time. Why doesn't the woman just leave? Why didn't my mom get herself and her kids the hell out of there? Well, I'll tell you why. Because you see, my mother didn't speak English. And she came from a country and a culture where women stayed with their men no matter what. And you have to remember, this was over 50 years ago. There was no Zontas or any kind of awareness about domestic violence, hotline, shelters, legislation, training for police. And remember, when I was growing up, all the police officers were men. Now, to our knowledge, there were no local groups, statewide organizations. Only there had been a place for us that we could have been directed to protect us and to help us, like a Zonta. Now, I got to tell you that my encounter at that police station was not the first or the only time that my family dealt with the authorities. You see, we were left with the impression that the only way that they were going to make an arrest was if he killed one of us, or we killed him. And believe me, I came real close to doing that. That's how desperate we had become. But thankfully, back in my days and back in those neighborhoods, guns were much harder to come by in the United States than they are currently. And in fact, there are experts in the field of crime prevention that have observed that there's currently a significant percentage of boys between the ages of 12 and 18 who are incarcerated for murder. They're there because they killed their mother's abuser. But there's another reason that may explain why my mother never left, which has to do with the reality that when a woman leaves, she and her children are often in the gravest danger of being killed by their abuser. So you see, these stories, my stories, only underscore why coordination between different parts of the community globally is so necessary for developing safety plans for everyone, and why awareness and dialogue are so desperately important for saving and rebuilding lives. We have to be on the same team, which includes rehabilitation, food assistance programs, cash assistance, safety nets, just to name a few of the desperately needed programs. But you see, the main reason why my mom never left was because she feared for our lives. So instead of my mother leaving my father, he abandoned her while she was pregnant and then kidnapped my two brothers, my sister, and myself all the way from Los Angeles, California to Miami, Florida. It happened early one morning when we were all still asleep that he ordered my mom out the back door and he said, "Don't make a scene." And then he drove her to a motel outside of town. And over the next few days, my siblings and I survived a torturous cross-country trip that should have killed us before we made it to Miami. We had no idea where my mother was. My father told us she had left us. She didn't want us anymore. Of all the indignities that my mother had to endure at the hands of my father, having her children taken from her was one of the scars that haunted her most of her life. Now, it took my mom many months to figure out where we were in Miami, have my baby sister Carmen, and then move to Miami herself. And when she got to Miami, she was granted a divorce. But back then, because my father made more money, he got to take care of all the children living with him. So without my mother in that household, things went from worse to horrendous. And at 15, even though I was absolutely terrified of my father, I knew that I could not live with his madness any longer. And that eventually led to the first and only physical confrontation with my dad that I started. I exposed him for the coward that he was. Here was a man that for all those years had wielded absolute power over his defenseless wife and small children, now cowering and crying beneath me. And all I ever wanted from my father was for him to love me. But in that instant, I knew the truth that I think many victims of violence against women, domestic violence, child abuse finally realize. And that is that love should never hurt. No matter how bitterly a man cries as he beats a woman and says, "I'm only doing it because I love you so much," or that he's brutally punishing his children to make them better because he loves them so much. That's not love. So that night, right after that fight, I ran away from my father's home and from his terror. And after several days of living on the streets, a high school classmate of mine spotted me and told me, "Everyone's looking for you, the school, the police, and of course, my father." Well, I told him what had been happening to me at home, and he insisted that I go home and tell my story to his father. Now, in my life, I've had many angels and advocates, like many of you, who have helped to guide me out of my darkness. My friend's father was one of those angels, and he also happened to be a lawyer. So through his help, I was able to take my father to court, where I was granted a restraining order. Now, you have to remember that the year was 1971. Yeah, I'm that old. 1971. And it was practically unheard of for a child to take a parent to court. But I'll never forget when I walked into that judge's chambers and I saw that the judge was a woman with pictures of her children on her desk, and I knew I was going to be safe. That was one of the last times I saw my father, who took his own life when I was in my 20s. Now, although I could have moved in with my mother, she was still struggling to get back on her feet, my new baby sister, Carmen. And the only option I saw was I was going to have to quit school and get a job. But instead, I found out, like my friend's father, the lawyer, and the judge who listened to my story and believed me, that there were other members and angels in my community that were a part of my team. So for the last 2.5 years of high school, I was taken in like the unofficial foster child by several families within my community. And, we talked about the village that raises a child. Well, my village had a lot of diversity. I lived with a Jewish family that owned a Chinese restaurant. There was an Italian family with 9 kids. I made 10. There were 2 Cuban families, and there was a Southern Baptist religious family. So for all the years that I've been given the message that I was unworthy and deserving of being hurt, I was now being given a different message by people who cared, my coaches, my teachers, my friends, and those families that took me in. And that message was that I was a good human being, worthy of being loved and of loving in return. Of course, I'd be lying to you if I told you this new road I was on didn't have a lot of bumps along the way. Shortly after I left my father's home, I joined a street gang, una pandilla. And I remember not even flinching or crying during the ritual beating that I took when I got jumped into the gang, because compared to what I had been receiving at home, this was nothing. Fortunately, back in my day, again, we fought with our hands. We didn't have guns. The idea of joining a gang for me was my desperate search for belonging, for the feeling of approval and love that's sometimes so lacking at home. But fortunately, I was beginning to find that somewhere else. In my senior year of high school, I moved in with the last family, the Cuban family, the Echevarria family, which I'm proud to say I'm still a member of today. And my adopted mother, Lillian, told me many years later that she had been warned by a lot of people in the community. I suppose a 6'2" and over 200 pounds and a former gang member. I was a big, tough, scary kid from a bad background. But taking me in was something she had to do to try to make a difference in my life. I've done my best not to let them or my other angels down. And in some cases, I had advocates and champions that I didn't even know about. And I mentioned this because I know some of you might play a behind the scenes role in your work, and you don't always get to see the long-term positive impact that you've contributed. At my high school, I had a vice principal, Mr. Joe McNulty, who I thought was always on my case. And I found out many, many years later that he was the first to defend me when others weren't so sure about my future. I never got the chance to thank the late Joe McNulty. So I'd like to thank all of you instead. For all of the mentors that are here, you have a special place in my heart. One of my most significant angels was my Miss Susie Baldwin, my high school homeroom teacher, who was there for my 3 years of high school. And she looked out for me, not just when I was leaving that abusive home, but when I was able to make a transition to be able to trust others not to hurt me. At a time when my self-esteem was non-existent, Miss Baldwin only saw my potential. Now, I know that it takes a toll on you when you see the devastating results of chronic abuse, violence against women, child abuse, and you wonder if that trauma can ever heal. But part of my intention today to tell you this part of my story is to encourage you not to give up, so that truly no woman, no child, or anyone victimized by abuse has to be left behind. And caring is the first essential step so that those who have been victimized can regain their self-esteem and realize their worth. So that when we ask the question again, like the Maasai do, how are the children? The goal is to imagine a community where all children have a chance to live up to their potential. So on a micro level, Ms. Baldwin represents the power to make a difference. And she is a reminder that within each of us is the power to change lives. And now, Ms. Baldwin was able to also convince the very skeptical high school administration that this former gang member should receive the only scholarship to a new program here in the United States called Close-Up. It used to take high school students to Washington, D.C. to show them American history and government close up. And I never, so inspired by my week in our nation's capital, especially as an immigrant, that when I returned back to my high school, I told Miss Baldwin, I think I want to run for a school office position. Well, she just looked at me and said, "Go for it, Vic." Well, I was scared, but I ran and I won. So in a very short amount of time, I went from being a violent member of a street gang in my sophomore year to president of my senior class. I lettered in 4 sports. I was captain of the football team. I went on to receive a 4-year football scholarship at Florida State University, where I made the dean's list and was also a team captain. At Florida State, I was lucky enough to play for Coach Bobby Bowden, the late Coach Bobby Bowden, who was another angel and father figure to me and a great example of what it truly means to be a man, and as he has been to many a player. Now, after graduating from Florida State with a degree in criminology, criminal justice, I don't know why I became an actor. I was also a free agent draft pick and the first Cuban American that was given a 2-season tryout with the NFL's Miami Dolphins. Now, I should clarify, this didn't put me on the active team roster, but it allowed me to play in 2 preseasons with a team that I idolized growing up in Miami. The Miami News called me the longest of long shots. So I got to tell you that I'm very proud of my roles as an athlete, as an actor, as an author, as an activist. But my most important role is that of father to my son Eli, who graduated from Harvard University, Georgetown Law School, and is now a lawyer in New York working on lots of pro bono cases. But my son in high school established a club called Teens Against Domestic Violence. And he was active with Harvard Men Against Rape. That's how we redefine manhood. His activism isn't anything new, you see, because in fact, at 5.5 years old, I brought Eli to Washington, D.C. to lobby on ending violence against women. And we were invited to the Oval Office to meet with President Bill Clinton. And of all the things that my 5.5-year-old son, Eli, could have asked President Clinton for, like, I don't know, like a national Pokemon Day or whatever was going on at the time, he looked up at President Clinton and he said, you need to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. I want to let you know my brothers and sisters are all successful, loving, and thriving individuals. They're proud parents, grandparents. And I know that if there was anything that went right in my house, that had to come from my mother, who in her own quiet, humble, and dignified way was able to instill a sense of goodness and resilience in all of us, because we've all broken the cycle of violence in our lives. My mother, my hero, she passed away several years ago at 84. And we like to call her La Luchadora, which means the struggler, the wrestler. My mother struggled against the odds and she triumphed. At the end of her life, she was surrounded by her children and numerous grandchildren. And I'm very grateful that my mother has encouraged me to share our story. As a spokesperson and as an author in my memoir, A Private Family Matter, Asunto de Familia, because she feels as I do, that if we can save one woman, one child, a man, anyone, from being subjected to the torture that was our life, that whatever privacy we experience will be worth it. And because of programs and pioneers like the ones that are here at the summit, and educational training like the one we're having today, the landscape has totally changed for families like mine. No longer is violence against a woman and her children considered to be a private family matter. You know, as we know, we got counseling and healthcare and all those different, and we're also seeking new innovative programs that search for new answers to old problems, along with a public awareness campaign that has begun to get the message across that love should never hurt. That's the good news. It's fantastic news. But here's the bad news, is that domestic violence, violence against women, is the most underreported crime in America, what is often referred to as the quiet crime, because it thrives in an atmosphere of shame, denial, and silence. Breaking the silence is why I became the national spokesperson for the National Network on Domestic Violence, why I'm honored to be here with all of you today, because you see, breaking the silence reflects the willingness to connect the dots, a phrase we hear people talking a lot about, but not really saying what that means. So connecting the dots to me means recognizing how the cycle of violence touches us all. Not only that violence against women, domestic violence touches everyone, but also there's a connection between the issues of domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, or any form of violence. And in fact, there's a connection between those violations and the violence that we fear on our school campuses, on our streets, and in our world. And what connects all of this is about one of the most fundamental civil rights every citizen of the world ought to have, and that is the right to be safe. So you see, we all have to care because of these connections. We all have to be a part of this team and work together. And I'll tell you, as I traveled extensively and spoken, I've learned that there are women and children in all communities, even the most affluent, that are victims and witnesses to violence in their families. And by the way, as my Eli has reminded us, we're never too young to talk about these issues. As an activist, I learned early in my journey that violence against women, family violence, knows no ethnic or economic boundaries, even though There are many and more affluent, educated communities that have the misconception that they don't have to worry about this issue. And some upper middle class neighborhoods, because of the shame associated with domestic violence, twice as many instances of violence go unreported, even though the occurrence is the same. In our country, it's 1 in 5 households, as it is in any other community. So how else can we connect the dots? The Center for Disease Control here in the United States estimates that child abuse is estimated to be 15 times more likely to occur in homes where domestic violence is present, violence against women. Between 10 and 3 million children each year witness domestic violence, and we lose 2,000 children each year in the United States to abuse. I got to tell you that I spoke at a middle school assembly in a beach community, which means there's lots of money. And I was told in advance that they're happy to have me, but they didn't have this problem there at their school. And I spoke to the students. And when I left, the principal called me 2 hours later and said that 7 of the children came forward and, to talk about their abuse, and 2 had to be immediately removed by our Child Protective Service. You see, if ignored, these patterns of abuse, they have a way of spreading. What begins in the home is someone being bullied by someone bigger than they are can make that hurt kid angry. And then sometimes that hurt kid becomes to school and he becomes a bully. And then sometimes the kid who's being bullied in America will show up at school with a gun to seek revenge, which we've seen way too often in our country. On Valentine's Day, back in 2008, a teenager with a troubled family history, very much like mine, walked into Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and he began shooting. In just a few minutes, 17 innocent lives were lost and 14 others were wounded. My sister Carmen's daughter, my niece, Samantha Fuentes, was shot 4 times. Now, she survived and has become an activist on issues of gun violence. I got to tell you that in many of the mass shootings in the United States, there has been a direct correlation between domestic violence, family violence. This is why we can't turn the other way and regard violence against women, domestic violence, as a private family matter, you see, because it will impact the whole community. It's why I believe that if we're truly sincere about creating a world where all of us, but especially our children, can grow up safe and free from the threat of violence, we have to stop violence where it begins and it's learned, and that's usually in homes and in relationships. Everyone in the community has a role to play, whether being on the front lines, like many of you, serving the youngest members of our society, educating teens to combat abuse, assisting adults in positive parenting, and coordinating with our medical and mental health professionals and law enforcement. And justice and educational systems. We also have to be talking about redefining our manhood for our boys and young men. And when everyone is involved on the same team, then when we ask the question, back to the Maasai tribe, when we ask that question, how are the children, we can answer that the children are well, and so are we. So we can't assume it's just somebody else's job. I'll never forget my 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Rice, and what she did for me. When I turned 13 and I started growing like a weed and filling out, my father decided that I was fat and I needed to be put on a diet. So he created a diet that I could only eat when he came from work at 1 a.m. in the morning. So that meant I didn't get a sack lunch that I could take to school. I didn't get a ticket to the school cafeteria. So my weight was dropping so rapidly that I eventually collapsed. I fainted in class. But Mrs. Rice was paying attention, and she personally and secretly bought me a meal ticket that allowed me to get to school for the rest of the year. What the aptly named Mrs. Rice did by paying attention was to send me the message that I mattered, which is what all of you are doing. It's so simple and so essential, and everyone who's either being abused or witnessing violence needs that message. And that's what all of you are doing in your work, and furthering an understanding of how to intervene, help, and prevent abuse, paying attention and making sure that others are doing so as well. And in this country, we can agree, in the United States, we can agree that that's the good news, that it is truly a bipartisan issue. We can all agree domestic violence, violence against women, is bad. But when it comes to really breaking the silence, a lot of people still ask, well, what does it have to do with me? Violence against women, child abuse, sexual assault. I'm not committing those acts. Why should I care? Well, hopefully you'll agree with me that we have to care, because if one woman, one child, one person is being hurt, that it has a tragic ripple effect on the whole community. But there's another reaction I get And that is that, oh, this is so heartbreaking and upsetting, but do we have to talk about this? It's so sad and depressing. The fact is that we do. What's encouraging in all of this is that of all the questions that I've been asked in my journey, the majority of those come from people who really care. They want to know how we can all do more to help women, children, and families break the cycle of violence. And so probably the question I'm most often asked is how was I able to break the cycle of violence in my life, and especially as a man? And I'm looking forward to answering your questions, but I thought this might be helpful to just talk about, how I was able to break the cycle of violence. And that has to do with what I call my survival toolbox that was given to me by advocates. So there's self-worth. It's the most important tool that has to go into that survival box. The feeling of self-worth that's many times cultivated from others. Trust, with the idea that I was worth investing in by others, that I mattered. I was able to develop trust that other adults wouldn't hurt me. Hope, faith, and courage are also tools. A sense of faith in a higher power, hope that, and a belief that maybe God or whoever, the higher power has had a better plan for me and for my family. For any individual, adult, woman, child who must leave an abusive, oppressive relationship, faith in one's own inner powers to stand alone is an essential, but also the courage to ask for help from advocates in the community is also an article of faith. And that's why I like to call those who intervene on my behalf, I like to call them angels. So safety, talking and being heard are fundamental, and healing the wounds. When people gave me their ears and let me trust them, that helped me attain trust and an inner conviction. Healing the wounds of abuse. You see, when there's a war zone happening in a home, the truth is that most members of the family don't know what real safety feels like. I didn't know what that felt like until I started living with those 7 other families. But again, they all had issues and challenges. It was just, they didn't become violent in responding to their issues. And another survival tool is humor and imagination. In my life, and still in my life, humor is a vital outlet. What was going on in my household was so crazy at times that only a good sense of humor could have saved me. Was it funny that my dad would say, run to the bathroom, go get the medicated sports cream so I could rub it on his sore muscle so he could better beat me up? No, but it was a good clue that what he was doing wasn't normal. And as a child, I was also punished and isolated in my bedroom. So in order to entertain myself, I would act out all these hilarious adventure stories, where I would practice dying in hundreds of different ways. Who knew that would be great training for a lot of the roles I would later take on as an actor? So you see, having a sense of humor and creative imagination is a human necessity. But here's the one that's really important, and that is the ability to cry. I remember the first time my mom heard me tell our story at a conference. My mom told me that she had lost the ability to cry. She said, "Ay, hijo, I have no more tears left." But that was disproved that day. My mother had a real cleansing, a real catharsis. I believe that all of us have to have the ability to cry, especially for what you are witnessing in your work. Has to be another skill, and especially for us tough macho men. Our boys and younger men can be empowered by giving them the space to mourn, especially the boys or young men who are hurt more when we shed tears. I believe we all have to be able to cry. So having self-worth, trust, faith, attaining a sense of humor, talking and listening, having the ability to cry, these are all tools in my survival toolbox. And so bit by bit, angel by angel, my self-esteem that was so shattered by my father, like those trophies, has returned. And as I said earlier, education, awareness, and inspiration cannot just be the job of advocates like you. We do need businesses and community leaders to join with our educators and school administrators to take the conversation into a wider public sphere and prepare our next generation. I'm so looking forward to the questions about my journey as a man of the movement to end men's violence against women. But I'd like to leave you with this. For those of you who wonder if you are truly making a difference, I hope you'll remember my story, because there were those who said that at 15, I was beyond hope, that my path in life was pretty much predetermined by my violent upbringing. But thanks to the courageous, concerned people who stepped in and gave me love and protection and helped me get my self-esteem back, I was able to break the cycle of violence in my life. Know that's what you can do for countless women and their children and anyone around the country. I thank you. God bless you. Peace.
Thank you so much, Victor. What a powerful story you just shared with us. I need to take a minute to collect my thoughts just because what you experience, there's so many children all over the world that experience this every day and have to put a brave face on going to school. Thank you for being so raw and sharing your personal story and for being a leading advocate in standing up for women's rights. We now want to open up our question and answer session with Victor. So please use our Q&A button on the bottom of your screen for any questions or comments to Victor. I'm going to start off with a question from Megan. Given what you have shared about your son, it's obvious the impact you had on him and his advocacy and volunteer work in high school and college. But do you have any recommendations or strategies that can be used more broadly to talk to boys and young men about these issues and stop the cycle of violence?
That's a great question. And what I would say is, one, using Eli as an example, the fact is we can talk about this issue at a very young age. You may have to, approach it and, in a little bit, with kids' gloves on, a little bit kinder than, but at the same time, you can address these issues. But I think that the way that you can, if you, part of my journey as a man in the movement, and I think why it has been effective is because in a lot of rooms, even I can walk into a room with, like, say, billionaires, but because I played college and professional sports, I'm considered an alpha male. And so they will listen. So that's why the more, so when I first started speaking, there was about 4 men nationally. Jackson Katz was one of them. And then, but over the last 25 years, this is the great news. We do have a lot more men involved on this issue. And, and we have to keep speaking about it because, we still have a lot of men who stand by on the sidelines, and it's called the bystander. What goes on there, and so I think that we have to address these issues, and especially with boys. And it could be coming from their, whether they're in music or arts or athletics, the people that really kind of they look up to. So I had those great mentors. My coach in college, the late coach Bobby Bowden, was a real mentor of men about what it really meant to be a man. And part of that was the respect given to women, which was not that common back in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so with regards to policymakers, we have a question from Renee. If you could deliver one message to policymakers about domestic violence, what would it be?
When it comes to especially the policymakers, a lot of it is the bottom line. How much is this going to cost? And that is so I'm going to use the example of my son Eli again because I think it's so. Eli went to Harvard. Had we had to pay full tuition at Harvard, it would have cost $65,000 a year for him to go there, right? But to incarcerate a male in the United States, it costs around $65,000, or if not sometimes more. To incarcerate a child in our system costs about $100,000 a year because of counseling and all the other things that are added to that cost. So if we're talking about bottom lines, a lot of people that's where their mentality sits. That's a good way to sort of approach them, is to say we would be spending a lot less money on these issues if we had a coordinated effort on how to address it, and also that in this country, in the United States, the good news is that we have more women in Congress. When I first started speaking 25 years ago, it was a boys' club. It was a few women, all the rest were all men. And the problem with men is that we're complicit. We won't speak up, even though we would never act that way. We would never be abusive. We would even be verbally abusive, but we will stand by again. So we have to really kind of put the pressure on male leadership in our country. And we're having a little bit of a problem. I don't like to talk politics, but we're having a problem when we have the leader of the United States who is, really, abusive and disparaging to women on camera. And that's a problem for our young boys. That's what they're witnessing too.
Yeah, Um, Powerful. I mean, it's sad that we have to go to policymakers and make it about finances and money in order for them to listen to us with regards to keeping people safe and for equality.
Mm,
It's sad that that's how we have to look at this issue rather than it shouldn't matter what it costs. But I love the perspective of that it actually would cost us less if we weren't
mm,
incarcerating, but also then what the trickle down effect is when you
mm,
have abuse happening in the home, like what was happening to you,
mm.
what that causes in society as far as other issues that then would be cost savings if we were
Right,
able to address this issue.
right,
So it's sad that we have to look at it as a cost savings in order to protect the most
right,
vulnerable people in our society. But if that's what it takes for
right.
policymakers to listen, then that's what we need to do.
Right.
So
So
thank
it's kind of, it's like with child therapy. There's a, I know that
exactly.
there's models for child therapy, whatever, but there's a group that I work with here in California, in the Los Angeles area. And a lot of their therapists, they meet the children where they're at. They don't like, they're not going to fall. So that's the same thing. Like meet them where they're at. Like if it's a, like a fiscal issue with them, then, come in with some real hard hitting facts. This is what it's costing us. We're putting a band-aid on a hemorrhage when we could really operate and correct the situation and really put a dent. I believe that if we could stop, I'm not saying that I'm the only one who thinks this way, but if we could stop violence against women, we would live in a much more peaceful world, because I believe that's where it kind of begins and starts. That's what our boys are witnessing. So I, somehow got a different message from my mother. I knew it was wrong from the get-go. Most boys don't get that. So, we need more positive role models for all men, but especially for our young boys and men.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we only have time for a few more questions, and there's lots of questions in our Q&A, and I don't want to skip over people's questions, so I'm sorry if I'm skipping over, but I do want to ask a question from Gabrielle. Do you have any thoughts with why your father was so violent, maybe today as being a father and an adult, or before you guys immigrated? Was there something that happened, do you feel, in his life in order was it a cycle that was happening in his life as well?
That's a great question, Gabrielle. The I would say that what I know about my father's story from Cuba, and I mean, I was born there, but I was obviously very young when I came to the United States. But my father came from a very powerful, wealthy family in Cuba. My mom came from the exact opposite, so she thought she was marrying into the Cuban Cinderella story, and that changed abruptly. In my mind, there have been several friends of mine that there's a professor who's also a family therapist that has used my book in his class for 10 years. And he has died, he get kind of, wanted to kind of analyze my father, and he believes that my father, I mean, I knew my father had a serious mental illness, because for the audience here, my father was the most deviant and the most violent, talking to you the way I'm talking to you right now, this calmly. And that's what made him really scary. So I believe my father had a serious mental illness that went unchecked. He might have been, one estimation, he might have been a sociopath, possibly a psychopath. He could have been bipolar, a lot of different things. But remember, this is a generation that would not seek therapy. We would ask my mother, after everything she went through, we would say, Mommy, you should go talk to somebody, meaning a therapist. And my mom would go, "Oh, no, no, eso para los locos." That's for the crazy people, because her generation, if you went to a therapist, the next step was they were going to put you in an institution, what they called an asylum. So there's no question my father had some issues. I don't think remember, because I'm older, corporal punishment, meaning, what happens at home sometimes, getting a spanking. I would go to school, and, Catholic schools and nuns would hit me with rulers. And when I got to public school, every principal had a paddle he would whack you on the behind. And so it was completely different how we, what we would consider, like discipline and abuse. And so that's why it was such a fog for such a long time. But I think there's definitely, I believe there was something desperately wrong with my father. And had he woken up any morning, to finish my statement for her, had he woken up any morning and he would have said, there's something desperately wrong with me, I need help, I would have taken my father anywhere he wanted to go, because the only thing that a son wants is the love and respect and of the father, especially a boy, so.
Absolutely. Okay, I have a question from Christiane. What do you think about campaigns like He for She? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the He for She organization, very similar to the White Ribbon organization. It's an organization about inspiring male
International men. I know the
allyship.
international men's movement, so I do. Yeah. I have a white ribbon, not on me, but I have one.
Yes.
So this one, say it again. It's called
So
He,
what
She.
do you think about, what do you think about campaigns like the He for She movement and us as an organization, Zonta? I'm kind of adding to Christiane's question here. We believe in collaboration with other like-minded organizations. We feel that when we collaborate together, we can solve more problems rather than us trying to solve things as an individual organization. So we want a lot of male allies to come on board with this ending violence against women. And so there's a lot of organizations such as the one that you volunteer with, the He for She, White Ribbon. We want to inspire more allyship. Do you think this cooperation with other male organizations is helpful for the movement? What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely, 100%. And there are, like I said, I'm so proud that there's so many groups that have sort of begun at the same time. Men's against violence, violence against women. There's oh my God, I'm spacing out, but there's 2 or 3 groups that I've had to, a Call to Men is another one. So, and they want to work. I mean, my feeling is the only way this is going to work is that we all come to the table. Now, my advice always to men is this is a movement. One, it's we need to be the new solution to the old problem. Violence against women has been going on forever and ever. We know that 1 in 3 women internationally will be a victim of a violent crime in their lifetime, and that violent crime, 90-something% will be men. There's 99% of all rapes in the United States are committed by men. So, how are we going to change without being, including men into the conversation? And here's the thing: most men are good men, but we stand by silently. And I'm going to use the example because I'm a former athlete. We're all at the 5 guys are at the sports bar watching the football game, American football, soccer, whatever. We're watching the football game. And one guy says, and excuse my language, one guy says, I had to slap my bitch upside the head last night. Right. And the other 5 guys who would never do that will do this. And they turn their, and they go right back to the game. That's the moment. That's not to physically, we're not violence against violence,
but to speak up,
to speak up. And that's where, we're starting to see, there's things going on in the United States right now, as many of you know, that, that our people are being kind of picked up off the streets and whatever. People are pushing back now because it's such a violation. Well, we should be looking at that same violation when we're talking about women. So I believe that there are men ready to get involved. And I believe that if we could really make a dent on this issue, we would live in a much more humane and peaceful world. It really starts with women, I believe. And you give us the great gift of life. Without you, we're not here. So I think we should be honoring that.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're running out of time, but I have one last little question that I want to squeeze in here. For those of us in this community, organizations like Zonta, what do you feel is one thing we can do more intentionally to engage men and boys in this work, not just as supporters, but as active partners in ending gender-based violence?
I think if you I think that if you come at it, no one likes to be criticized. So the same thing with a young boy or even a man is if we come at it and from a sort of a critical analysis, blah blah blah. But if we come at it from the perspective of talking to them about their sister and talking to them about their mother, their wife, whatever. If we come to men with, saying, stop thinking about this as somebody else's issue. This is your issue that might come knocking on your door one day when you're a father of a daughter, and I think so there is, I believe, again, I believe there's more good than evil in this world. And I believe that's it. Like if we just, again, approach men, don't put them on their heels. Don't make them feel like, oh my God, you're male bashing. No.
Yep.
And the same thing when I talk to men, I talk to them, I talk to them directly about this, but a lot of times they don't understand. And I'm gonna borrow this from Dr. Jackson Katz, who's a colleague and a friend. So I'm gonna just to leave you with this image. So he does a drill when he speaks to college students on campus, and it'll be women and men in the room, and he'll have a whiteboard, and he will put a line down the middle for the men and the women over here, and he'll ask the men first, what did you do today to avoid being sexually assaulted?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the men just sit there. They're going, what? They have no idea what they're talking. And then they go over to the other side, and the woman says, I got keys in my hand. I can't walk at night. I can't use my earphones. I gotta get it. And the men start getting angry. They had no idea that this is going on. And I mean, it's a real beautiful reaction that they're having because they didn't know. So we have to be clued in and not be clueless. So, I really believe that most men are good men, and we just have to find a way to get them to join on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, it's time to close our first session. We could go on for hours, Victor, speaking with you. You're amazing. Please tune in for session 2, which will air in about 3 hours. We will be screening the documentary Men Against the Tide and have a talk back with the filmmaker Priyali Suor. I will pass this along to Christina for our final word.
Thank you. And my warmest thanks to you, Victor. You touched my heart with your story. Thanks also to our moderator, Tanya, and to Shannon, of course, our technical support. I don't know what we should do without you. And also a warm thank you to all of you who choose to participate in this year's summit. And I welcome you all to sign our pledge via the link that you find in the chat box, please. Because, as also Victor said, it is only together that we can end violence against women and girls. Thank you so much, everybody, for today.